So as I mentioned, joining us tonight is Joanna Hershon. She is the author of 5 novels, including her very latest, Saint Ivo, a story that reads like a thriller. Saint Ivo is a powerful investigation into the meaning of choice and family, whether we ever know the people closest to us, and how, when someone goes missing from our lives, we can ever let them go. When Joanna is not writing, she is teaching writing as an adjunct assistant professor in the creative writing department at Columbia University. In conversation with Joanna tonight is Claire Tisne Haft, Greenwich Time Motherlode columnist and a former publishing and film executive. Thank you both for joining us this evening, and I will let you get to the conversation.
All right. Welcome, everyone. This is completely surreal. I've never done anything remotely like this, but thank you so much for joining us this evening with Joanna Hershon for her riveting novel that has just been published in a curious time frame. Joanna, do you want to start off telling us what it's like to publish under quarantine with 3 children at home with you?
You know, it's been, I would say there's some obvious negatives. I had thought that I would be tonight with my good friend who's tuned in, the wonderful Amy Lee and her family. Thought I'd be having a sleepover, having some fun drinks, getting to talk to people in person, you know, having a spring of sharing my book in different cities, and frankly, just being kind of on my own more and traveling. And that is the opposite of what's happening now. I'm extremely not on my own. But I'm also, I really am not complaining. I feel very fortunate. The time has definitely, you know, made me full of gratitude. It's true. And also, I have to say what's been the most surprising about, someone asked me this question in another event, like what has been the most surprising about publishing under quarantine? And I'm not sure it's surprising, but for me, knowing my personality, but I will say that because like right now, I'm just looking at Claire, I'm just looking at you, and we're having a conversation. And I know that people are here, I know you're listening, and that's wonderful, but I feel like there's a bizarre intimacy about if you can settle into it. You know, like be present and just look at you and have this conversation. There's a strange and kind of wonderful intimacy about these conversations where it's not the same as sitting in front of a group of people. I'm just in my room and I'm talking to you. So that's what I would say is surprising and strange.
You know, it's really interesting that you say that because that feels what it's like to read your book. There's an interesting parallel going on to what you accomplish in your narrative and what is going on right now, which I found really striking and interesting. There's an intimacy there that is demanded of you and your main character. But I don't want to, we'll get into that in a minute. I just want to preface that Joanna's written many novels. They've all done extremely well. This one, the New York Times notoriously, is beyond difficult to get a glowing review from. And it honestly could not have been a better review. I imagine you're very happy with it.
Well,
Great word of news and reviews so far. But I just wanted to quote this one specifically that ran on April 14th. And it opens just by saying, a weekend in the country, 2 couples reconnect after years of estrangement in a quaint upstate farmhouse. And then it goes on to say that this novel, her 5th novel, spans only a single weekend, which is actually, I think, really important to how the book drives itself. And goes on to say, Hershon maintains a quiet terror throughout this slim, eccentric novel. Though it moves at harrowing pace, this is not a traditional thriller. The perspective focuses narrowly on Sarah, our main character's interior, giving us intimate access to her paralyzing social anxieties and complicated marriage. The friction resides innovatively in the agony of interpersonal misunderstandings, the awkwardness of old family friends, now strangers, trapped together for a period of days, what to reveal and what to gloss over, how much to admit about their lives and how they've changed, and about who is missing. And I just thought that was a lovely kind of way to, without giving away the big reveal in the novel, and there is a big reveal, which I won't be giving away, a good way to kind of sum up how the novel takes us through this story. And I have to say, I was telling Joanna earlier, I sat down and read this in two sittings, because there's the drive of the novel is very, it's almost dramatic. It reminded me of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. There's like a narrative tension of who's going to explode and what is this secret. And so I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on, I don't know, the parallel that you find yourself now and the narrative that you throw us as readers into in this experience, in this novel.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, I feel like when I realized kind of slowly, the way we all did, that this was not going to be something like, oh, we're kind of taking it easy and being, a little more cautious about riding the subway, or flying. Like, all of my events are canceled. Everything was kind of dominoes falling, not to mention the state of the world and everything on a much more important scale. I began instantly reflecting upon the fact that I actually felt very connected to my novel. It wasn't hard for me to connect to it. And that is not always the case. Like, if you write something and then all of a sudden there's this much more pressing global concern, it can sort of feel like, oh, who wants to read about, this? What's this? And I actually felt like, oh, weirdly, this has taken on a new meaning to me. And there's the theme of the novel all of a sudden kind of announced itself to me, which for me, it takes a long time usually for me to figure out what the novel's about. People say, what's your novel about? And it's hard for me sometimes, usually, to actually say it, because that's not, I don't think I'm going to write a novel about this and then write it. It's more of a discovery. So for me, the theme really announced itself, which is, this is a novel about learning to live with uncertainty, profound uncertainty. And also, this is a novel about how to live when your life does not look the way that you thought it was going to look and you don't recognize it. And so, though it's certainly not a literal parallel at all, there's an emotional parallel. There's kind of a bizarre emotional resonance happening, I think, for me at least.
Yeah, and I found that to be so
there is this like weird claustrophobia feeling about the novel that in a good way, but kind of a cinematic, people together on for a weekend in this one house, and there's a weighted kind of tension about it. And it's taken on new meaning, this kind of, what is it like? First of all, they're doing exotic things like socializing and having dinner and, sharing drinks. And so that also feels kind of reckless, but also just the idea of all being under one roof and, that kind of being slightly trapped in a situation you're uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I find that so striking. So just to backtrack a little bit. Okay, so for those of you that haven't read the novel, you must read it. Basically what you're given, and our author is drives us almost chronically forward by what she chooses to reveal and not reveal. So that's how you're kind of drawn in. You meet this woman in Brooklyn and her husband. There's something very wrong. Something is going on that's very wrong, because this year has not been like every other year. Things are not as they should be. This woman is very unsettled. And this is our hero, Sarah, the main character. Starts off with a lunch with her literary agent. Then she meets a stranger on a train. And then she comes home to her husband, and they go away for the weekend to reconnect with old friends. And they spend a long weekend there. And most of the novel is around that weekend. It's framed around that weekend. And slowly, as the weekend evolves, you find out what's wrong. And there's a lot wrong, but there's one really big thing wrong, having to do with a child, their child, their daughter. And it, for me, it's interesting. The review refers to it as an eccentric thriller, but would you call it an eccentric? What would you?
I liked that description. It's not necessarily, I guess it's a little eccentric. I don't know. I don't think it was off. I think it was, but eccentric maybe makes it weirder than it is. I don't think it's weird, and it's certainly not, it's I think it's very relatable, at least from what I'm hearing from readers, even if they don't literally relate to the story. I think it is bringing up a lot of feelings of recognition, emotional recognition. So in that way, I don't think it's eccentric, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think that it reads like a thriller, yet it's a very literary internal experiment on a certain feeling that you absolutely nail, which is, how do you live with uncertainty, which is the question that you came to. It's so interesting to me that you don't know that answer until you talk to your readers, because the uncomfortableness of Sarah is like palpable and visceral all the way through. And it's sort of like she's throwing herself forward in events in her life, and there's all this dramatic tension around her, and you're kind of being carried along without the full picture. So, and I found that wonderfully effective as a way to drive a story. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to this story, and where did it come from? It came from a short story in Granta, correct?
Well, basically the whole process is interesting to me, just in that this novel really took shape over several different forms, and the initial spark of the novel, I always think of, when I think about talking about where a novel comes from, I rarely think of it as an idea. I always think of it as a spark, because it's like something is alighted, and I know it's something, but I don't know what it is yet. So something definitely sparked this novel, and it was in fact an encounter that I had on the subway that was very similar to the one Sarah has on the subway, but I am not Sarah, my protagonist. This is not an autobiographical novel. So the encounter was very different. But that, in fact, it's a similar encounter that I had. I had a very strange encounter on the subway. And after the encounter, I knew immediately that this was the start of something creative. I thought it was the start of a movie or a book, and I knew it. And that never happens to me. So I wrote it down, just what happened, not any kind of craft to it, just this happened, which again is very unusual for me. I'm not a writer that takes notes in my daily life, at this point. So I wrote it down, and then for years I tried to figure out what the story was, and I was trying to write a novel, and I thought I was going to write a more traditional thriller, like I was like, this is the thriller. This is the beginning of a literary thriller. And then I did a tremendous amount of research about this subculture that I didn't end up writing about at all. And I was very stuck. And then I put it aside. I found out I was pregnant. I had a baby. And I decided, okay, I'm actually actively not going to write. I'm not going to think I should write and then complain about not writing to myself. I was just putting it aside. I didn't know what to do. And then my daughter was 6 months old, and I rejoined the writer space. And I said to myself, you know what? You're just going to go, and you're going to not think about plot. You're not going to think about craft. You're going to sit down and just start with that subway ride and just free write. Just nothing's going to make sense. And it really very quickly became, and it really felt like doing this bizarre, like a tarot card reading or something, where an image would come up and I would just write, and I wouldn't edit myself, and I wouldn't ask why I was thinking about anything. And it really felt like dreaming or like some kind of fever dream. You know, and you have to remember I was 6 months out from giving birth and I just had a daughter. And I really
I
think
was going to say you had a daughter, which is so
out of some, you know, a place of fear, a place of like really primal fear. And I think I was able to kind of invite it in or not run from it and just go into it, like really allow myself to go into it through a story. So that ended up quickly becoming a short story. I wrote the short story. It was published, but even before it was published or taken to be published by Granta, I couldn't let the novel go. And I mean, I couldn't let the story go. And I thought there's really more here. I just can't let it go. And so I started conceiving of a story, a plot. And I did consider writing a much broader kind of book involving different points of view. And I realized that was not what I was interested in. And it became very clear to me very quickly that it was going to be 3 days, that it's going to be a weekend, and I wrote it. Yeah.
And point of view, did you switch at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I usually do not write in the first person. That's just not the way I usually write. And the story was in the first person, which I stemmed out of this immediacy and this kind of process that I forced upon myself. And I do think that really I think it's why the book has this intimacy.
Totally.
So the story is in the first person. It's kind of interesting if you read the story because it's in Granta and you can access it online. Because the story is in the first person, and it's not an excerpt from the book. The book, it came from it in the sense that the story is almost like the beginning and the end of the book, but then the novel's kind of in the middle. So, but I think that I switched from the first person to the third person for the novel. But because it was rooted in this very immediate first person voice, I think it retained that intimacy.
It totally did. I have to hand it to you. I feel like you are inside Sarah the entire way through. And I have to say, you said it felt like you wrote it in a fever dream. Mm-hmm. That's what it feels like to read. It really, it's like becomes compulsive. It's like you're in this character and you just want to figure out what's wrong, what the big thing is that's happened here. But also terrible things keep happening to her. And you kind of want to, not terrible, I should say dramatic things that, that's another question. It has a kind of dramatic feel to it. Has there been talk about a play or a film or anything?
I've been some time. I've had some very exciting films.
You have?
Yes.
That totally doesn't surprise me.
Nothing is happening yet, but yeah, I've had some really interesting, exciting conversations and interest. And it's been really fun to talk to different people about the reactions, and it does have a very cinematic quality, but it also is very internal. So I feel like that's the struggle.
Yeah, totally.
The film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. That would be the struggle. It feels like, I was going to say, a cross between sort of a Virginia Woolf and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, in that couple, that foursome is so tense and there's something so big there and you're not quite sure what it is. So the daughter of this couple is a character that really is not given a voice. Her name is Lita. And it's extremely important. Looking back, I didn't know that you wrote it when you were pregnant with your daughter, that the daughter be a daughter. And I think it would be a very different book if she was a son. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I didn't write it when I was pregnant, just to be clear. I wrote it when she was 6 months old.
Okay.
I started entertaining writing when she was about 5-6 months old. To be honest, I really don't know. I don't know why. It was such an intuitive beginning. I mean, the subway kind of opener was very much its own thing. And then when I started writing, my own, I guess, preoccupations came to the surface. But it was very intuitive and unconscious. It wasn't something that I really thought about. So
it's so interesting to me because you were just having a daughter. So we have a question here from Jane Brown. Her question is, Lita's story is so heartbreaking. I wonder if you consider any other storylines for her character, or if you were sure from the beginning about her character's struggle.
That's a really good question. I think I was sure from the beginning. I did consider writing much more of her point of view. So that would, by necessity, give her a broader story, broader trajectory, or a more understandable trajectory. But yes, I was really interested in the kind of heartbreak of this absence. I don't want to say too much about her as a character because I don't want to give the book away in terms of spoilers, but
well, I'll just tell everyone right now what it's all about.
But no, I did consider giving her much more of a point of view, and giving her a point of view. So that would have necessitated more of her story and more understanding of her story, but her trajectory was, I think, always there. And and I would say it's not over. And not that I'm writing a sequel, but I would like to think that this is, even though this book has a lot of darkness in it and her story has a lot of darkness in it, there is hope, I would say.
It really ends on a very hopeful note. It's sort of like the sun comes out or something.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's how I feel it. I feel like the book is very kind of atmospheric and gloomy, and then not gloomy, but there's the darkness, but there are these like bursts of light, and in the end I do feel it's quite light.
Totally. I was going to say, I want you to read there's, for some reason, I grew up in Brooklyn, and so Brooklyn speaks to me for obvious reasons, but I walked away from the book with this one sentence in my head, which was about the mouth of the park breathing out. And she's talking about Prospect Park. And for me, that was so incredibly visceral all the way through. I kept coming back to it in my own imagination. And I don't know why. Does that line stand out to you at all? Or the actual line, and I want you to read the section if you can, Joanna, starting on the top of the cloudless sky. Exactly.
I know exactly where it is. Okay.
If you could just go through to the next, sort of through that section, that would be awesome.
Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit of the book, and all you need to know if you haven't read the book is that Sarah has had an unsettling day. She had an annual lunch with her. She's a filmmaker. She's had an annual lunch with her agent, who it's just the lunch where her agent asks her what she's working on, and it doesn't go well. She's very unsettled. She gets in the subway. She has a very profoundly unsettling but also fascinating encounter, gets out of the subway, and she's married to Matthew. Okay. The cloudless sky thrummed with pearly light, and a text came in from Matthew. How is seeing Caroline? Where are you? Where was she? She went over the lunch and the subway ride, unwittingly weaving together two sets of images and phrases until she forced herself to think of anything else, and a group of kids, maybe 8 years old, popped into her head. They took wilderness skills classes in Prospect Park, and she often saw them there, dismissed around this time. The kids were so cute and also easy to mock. Wilderness skills in Brooklyn. But it wasn't too difficult to imagine how, when autumn came, and when the park's entrance became a dark mouth blowing bitter air, the idea of knowing how to use a compass would seem pretty shrewd. She imagined a son, a boy named Alex, his expression as she approached. He was lanky and freckled, with a mop of dark hair, big feet, dazzling smile. Even though she always picked him up from the park, his face lit up every time. She supposed she wasn't the only person who daydreamed these glimpses, other children, other husbands, other lives. She dreamed of the children she might have had, if this or that pregnancy had taken, if this or that man had been hers. Sarah once met a woman in the support group who was significantly older than she. And though the woman looked tired and sad, she also looked stylish. Sarah remembered a blush-colored boucle sweater and what solace Sarah had taken in the care the woman clearly showed herself. She'd been frank about cutting off her daughter. "I'm done," she told Sarah. "It's over. She's not getting any more money. I've already given, do you know what I mean? I gave at the office. I gave at the door." Where was she? Where was Sarah? "I'm with our daughter again, Matthew, and everyone calls you Matt except for me. You're making lush, short films that no one will see because it's the dawn of the 1990s and there's funding and interest and no internet. And I am with our daughter. I'm sitting on the pine floors of our kitchen in Prospect Heights 24 years ago after feeding the baby breakfast. And I'm seeing the grooves in the honey-colored planks, the bits of food that are stuck in those grooves that I need to remove with a special knife kept specifically for this purpose. I'm with our daughter, 12, 13 years later, different apartment, different world, as she laughs so hard at the TV that I think something is wrong with her. Could something be wrong with her? And then I start laughing too, because her laugh is contagious and, yes, just a touch scary, the way the best laughs are. She rose from the bench and started walking. Maybe she was being followed. She walked faster, developing a stitch in her side. If Matthew had just texted her, it meant he'd finished his long run, which he did most Friday afternoons when he wasn't on a shoot. Despite the side stitch, she began jogging toward where he usually finished, suddenly eager, frantic to see him. That's it.
It's amazing that the sense of physical space. Where they go for the weekend is a town in upstate New York. Was that a real town? Or it's very, very clear. It's fascinating because you refer to it being a town that's at one point, I think it's Armand, the couple that they're visiting, says, yeah, the poverty is real, man. Like, they're visiting a town that's very different from, they have moved from LA to this town. And, you know, obviously this couple are coming up from Brooklyn, Sarah and Matthew. And so they're coming from very different kind of, you know, trendy worlds and not trendy, I don't know, urban life. And they see this very real poverty in this town. There's a description, I don't know if you remember, of course you remember it, the grocery cart coming in and out of town, and the woman, was that the poverty of the town felt important? Was that?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to write about this area that, we're not even so much about the area, but the way the area, what it provoked in me. I rented a house off of Craigslist about 13 years ago. So my twins were not yet 2, and just rented it. And it was before Airbnb, and it was, you know, this really, for me, very atmospheric place. And I've always wanted to write about it. And I always knew I would write about it. I thought of different ideas about writing about it. The novel definitely has a pretty subtle but definitely present social commentary, definitely about class and politics and privilege, and it's very current. I think, like, what is it? Parts of our culture that we're all grappling with in different ways. So
and the desperation of poverty. Yeah,
and also the feelings that from all sides, you know, when you're confronted with privilege, when you're confronted with poverty, and how to behave, how people behave, and it's just endlessly fascinating to me and difficult, very, very difficult.
Wait, how are people supposed to behave again?
I don't know, but we're all trying to figure it out. So, I mean, this town definitely had a lot of, it held a lot of dramatic promise for me. There was a lot going on, and much did not make it into this book, but it seemed a very, very small and very rich place to explore our culture.
Okay, I have a request here from everyone out there. If you have a question, please put it into ask questions by typing in chat. And you access your chat at the bottom of your screen. And they pop up for me. So I am happy to open it up to any questions that you might have for our fabulous author with her fabulous lipstick. I'm amazed that you can even find lipstick at this point. I can find my socks. I want to talk about the art of writing around an invisible character and how strangely the character that you don't write about most drives your plot. Take it away.
I mean, it was a real challenge, and
it's like her effect on everyone is what drives this story forward. Yet we see her in slight flashbacks, and it's almost like paint strokes. We see her here and there, but we don't ever really have her. And so
I guess I just feel like that is usually, it's a haunting. There's
yeah.
There's a haunting at play. And I feel like anyone who's in a relationship of any kind that is unrequited, whether it's like desperate romantic love or friendship, that you've lost your friend, whether, loss of any kind. I think that the important people speak to us in our imagination and through we want them to be with us. We want to, even now, like I want to hug my friends. I want to hug my family. I want to give my parents a hug. Like, but that's so present. I think it's so present with all of us. And I feel like anyone who's lost anyone knows that time is completely irrelevant. I mean,
totally
completely irrelevant.
Totally
so,
irrelevant.
And memories don't make sense. And why certain memories stick in our minds is, who knows? Why do you remember certain things and you don't remember other things? It's totally mysterious. And so I'm really interested in that. I think fiction writing can uniquely address that pain and that beauty, like that beauty of, like, you can remember someone's eyelashes. It's just like, makes me cry, like just people's individual essences, and how I think fiction writing can really do that more. Maybe music can do that, where it's just like suddenly you're in this private world, very intensely. And I love reading fiction for that. So I guess that's what drives me more than anything.
There's got a question here that says, Sarah and Matt lose their cell phones at the start of the novel. Was it important to do away with those in the story? And who are some of the authors you draw inspiration from or enjoy reading? Mm-hmm. There's a line somewhere in there where, doesn't Sarah say something about a cell phone being an appendage or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's envisioning a conversation she'll have with her friend about her cell phone was stolen, and there'll be like a surface level of how cell phone is this crazy appendage and we have to do without it, but then there's another level of why it's so upsetting to her to be without her phone.
So just to backtrack really quickly for everyone who hasn't read, so Sarah is mugged in the park and her husband comes to help her, and both of their phones are stolen, and they go literally from that event to the police office to their friend's house. And that is somehow very important because she still has bruises and cuts on her face, and Matthew, her husband, says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And she says, "Absolutely." But you go from this kind of violent act of a robbery, a mugging, right to the country. There's really no respite, and they don't have their phones.
So to me, it's important to make her as unmoored as possible.
As what? As possible?
I just think she's so emotionally unmoored.
Unmoored.
She's really unmoored. Like, she's not tied to anything, including herself. So the phone, I think, for all of us is this kind of lifeline and a connection to everything, everyone. and what you feel like, just in the most mundane way, what you feel like when you can't find your phone or it's gone or it gets stolen, really sends people into complete panic. So without even everything that's going on in my novel, I do think it sets people in a state of being unsettled and unmoored. So I did want that. And there's a lot that I think there's a lot that happens dramatically that can't happen when you have cell phones. It's really, I thought there's so many times I've been watching films with my sons who are 14 and trying to show them some old movies or movies that I loved when I was a teenager. And I'm always pointing out, like, see, that could never have happened. You just pick up the phone and text them, or or there are these, and it's been really interesting how people bring in cell phones dramatically, really creatively to films and books now. But
yeah.
My editor at some point, there's some line I have about it, and when she was editing it, she had this one little line. She went, "Yes, down with cell phones." It really does take. There's a moment where Sarah realizes if she had a cell phone, she'd be doing this, she'd be doing that, she'd be, checking.
Yeah. I remember.
It's like she's not doing any of that, and it gives her also a certain freedom. No one can do. So that's
love using my cell phone. I love it. She refers to having a landline. Of course, for Sarah, it's actually her phone is very, and she keeps the landline
for an important
reason.
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of reporting of facts? Oh, wait, we forgot about your favorite author.
Well, I think the question was what authors influenced me. And that changes all the time, but I feel like with everyone, I think books from my youth those are the ones that maybe made me feel like I could write or I had to write or something like that. I always feel like when people ask me, like, what's your favorite novel? I always come up with Anna Karenina and American Pastoral by Philip Roth.
All right.
But it always changes. Michael Cunningham was a huge influence on me, and he was my teacher when I was at Columbia and I was writing my first novel. He was a really big influence on my writing, and mainly I think about him a lot because I feel like a lot of what I keep coming back to about this book or questions I'm asked is that I think I really write, and I'm interested in writing. When I teach writing, I talk about a lot is writing from the body, like really rooting the experience in the physical. And he's amazing at that and really talked about that in class. So his books are really physical, and that got definitely into my brain and soul. So
yeah, there's something about food in this book, particularly. Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot about food, and actually
the last food that she has with Matthew is a very important food.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I did an event with this wonderful writer who just got a rave review in the Times as well. Her name is Phyllis Grant, and she wrote a memoir, and it's a memoir that has recipes in it, and it's so beautiful.
Oh.
And we did an event together recently, and so we met at a class in a class at Columbia about 20 plus years ago, and fell in love with each other's writing, but only knew each other a little bit. And then we reconnected a little bit online. She lives in California. And then we found out our books were both coming out with FSG same time. And they're almost exactly the same length. And even though hers is a memoir, mine is a novel, there are all of these incredible parallels. So, and one of them is food. Her writing about food is exquisite. So
isn't that amazing how that happens? It's like kismet or something, like the big imagination, big magic, to quote, what's her name? Eat, Pray, Love woman. What's her name?
Gilbert.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, we have another question here. What kind of reporting of facts did you do for the book, if any?
Reporting of facts. Not a lot of reporting of facts. past two novels were extremely research heavy. I researched for 3 years before starting one of my books, The German Bride, and my last book was a tremendous amount of research.
So much research.
So, this book, I would say, was the opposite. I'm sure there were facts I researched while writing this story, but it's not a heavily researched book. I definitely researched Saint Ivo, the actual saint, which has a little bit of, not, there's a significance to the name, to the saint, but it's a place in the book, and we don't learn about who he really was. But I did research that a little bit. Not a whole lot. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but not a lot of research.
Huh. Yeah, it sort of flows like it's flowing from within. It just kind of comes out. And then there's sort of, I'm wondering about did you write it chronologically?
That's a good question. I did, well, sort of. The short story on which from which it sprang, as I said, it's kind of like beginning and the end are basically the story, give or take. But yes, I did just sit down and write it chronologically, but I always do that. I don't think I've ever written something not chronologically. And I think that's because I'm such a character-driven writer, and it's more like acting for me when I'm writing. I have to like be in the character. So the idea to me, and I think it's fascinating when I hear people like, "Oh, I wrote the end first." I can't even imagine that, because I can't get there until I get there. I can know, I can write an outline, and I can know what the end is going to be and where we're going to be and how people are going to feel theoretically. But
did you know the ending here when you started?
I didn't know. I know the feeling of the ending, but I didn't, this particular ending of this novel, which I have to say I'm very proud of. It came in layers. Like, I knew the ending, but then the short story ends fairly similarly, but when I wrote the novel, it kept going a little. And I really enjoyed that subtle layering of that piece.
It felt so real. It felt like this happened to you or me, or it felt so real. It's as if, what if something like this happened to me? This is what this would look like, a weekend in the life, sort of. It resonated so deeply, in particular with the way it ended, because I don't know, there could be temptations to end it differently.
This was it. I mean, I'm interested in everything existing all at once, all the time. The vicissitudes of our emotions, like the joy and darkness and laughter and pain and everything. And sort of, as I said, I feel like that's why I write fiction. And that's what I enjoy about trying to convey all the different feelings we have all at once. I mean, so that's what it is.
So I'm just going to jump in quickly here. If there are any final questions, any final thoughts for Joanna, we are still taking questions in the chat box feature if you want to send one there. But yeah, Claire and Joanna, I'll let you give some final thoughts.
Thank you.
Okay, so there is another question. And staying on the book theme, what are you currently reading in quarantine, or have you been reading more than usual?
To be honest, I have been reading less than usual because I've had less time than usual, because I have 3 children and no help besides my wonderful husband. But so usually in my life, I have my children go to school, have some babysitting. So I've been probably reading less, but what I have read has been high quality. And one of the books, as I mentioned, was Phyllis Grant's book, Everything's Under Control. That's such a beautiful book. I've been buying a lot of books. That's what I've been doing. I've been buying a lot of books. I've been giving books as gifts because I want to help independent booksellers stay alive. So I've been yeah, I've been buying books. I've given Everything's Under Control to several people. Kathy Park Hong has written a wonderful book of essays called Minor Feelings, and that's a book that talk about has, you know, it has a lot of resonance, unfortunate resonance right now. It's basically a book of essays it's called An Asian American Reckoning, and it writes about being Asian American, and it's funny too. It's very funny. It's very sharp and fascinating, and has a lot of relevance to what's going on right now in our culture. There's been an unfortunate, enraging uptick of Asian American, you know, assaults and terrible racism. So that book is great, and it's really entertaining as well. It's like reads really quickly and sharp. It's very sharp.
So is yours. I have to say, it's for a book that carries so much emotional weight interior, it feels like you are on like a slam voyage. And I mean, I do think it's true that we're all stuck inside with our kids or whatever your circumstances are. It was like a little break from everything else because you're so internal with her in the process of these 3 days, really, these 3 short dramatic days. So in a weird way, it's a perfect book to read to kind of take yourself out of the present, because I think as an author, you demand that you have to kind of give it your all when you're following this character because of what she puts in front of you in her narrative. It's so gripping. I am proud. I've had a number of people write to me and say they haven't been able to focus on any
book that they could pick up and read, and it got them now reading more, but that they just couldn't focus, and my book allowed them to focus, which has really been like the greatest compliment I could think of. You know,
it's very easy to read. It's a compulsive, like you have to read forward because of the way you string through. You know, I mean, it's amazing that an author can't read their own work for the first time. So I like want to convey to you how this feels to read your novel. It's as if you can't, the way you've sprinkled the secret or the reveal or the trauma through, you can't quite let go of this character, and you are just there the whole time. And the fact that it's a short period of time, I think, is really important to the way it drives. Mm-hmm. It drives really quickly. There's another note here that says, just want to say how much I enjoyed reading this all in one day and sticking with the momentum of the novel. Highly recommend taking that approach for anyone who has not read St. Ivo. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of just what we were saying.
I wish I could look at you, whoever asked that question.
Thank
you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it really has this incredible momentum to it. And did you write it in like one fever dream flash? Did it take?
No.
Okay. No. Not at all. No.
But I did write it for me fairly quickly. I mean, my other books, it has been notable to me that my other books are all fairly sweeping. Like they all take place for long periods of time. And this, I really narrowed the lens on it. And I'm glad I did. It was kind of interesting to remove, like really putting that pressure on the time frame.
Yeah, it worked really well. It conveyed such a dramatic beginning. And there's a lot in your review, there was a lot of talk about it was unconventional beginning and ending and plot structure, unconventional risks, she calls them. And the book does not grant us, I'm reading for the New York Times, a neat circular ending. And Hershon is not afraid of ambiguity. It's like, it's its own structure, its own arc. Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions that we can address herein? Is there anything that you found most moving about the process of writing this, or difficult, or something that really it's a hard question, but I mean,
a lot of it was really emotionally draining, but also weirdly fun is not the right word, but like I used to act, and I do feel like if I think this is a fun part, like a gritty, meaty part for an actress, like because it was I feel like she's a live wire. Like the tension and the suspense in the book, I think, is her. Like, what's she going to do next? And it was
Matt actually says that to her at one point. He's like, you're a wire right now, right?
that's pretty fun to, not fun, but compelling to inhabit that character. And I would say that was the maybe hard, I don't know about hardest, but it had took on a lot of layers, like getting to know her as a character and gaining confidence in my writing, of gaining confidence in terms of my instincts for her was a layered process for sure. You know,
Because
like
so much of what she does, she's beyond her instincts. And it's interesting. Like it's almost like it's unclear whether she has control of her. Yeah.
Yeah. And things you were saying, like things keep happening to her, but I would say that she's also moving through the world in such a way that things are going to happen to her. And, you know, I think we've all seen that. Like if you enter the world, move through the world in a way that you're kind of open to, I mean, some things just happen, right? Some things just happen to us, but some things you're kind of opening the door to it and saying like, here I am, or even also opening the door to mystery and wonder and seeing magic or seeing possibility in the mundane, you know? So
Yeah.
that's what I think she's like too, as a character. And
That's
that was
well
fun.
said.
Right. All right. Well, I'm just going to jump back in here. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you all for your thoughtful questions. And Joanna, thank you for joining us tonight. We loved hearing about your book. I'm sure anyone out there who hasn't read it yet is excited to jump in. We've all got plenty of time to pick up the book. Don't forget to order your copy. The link is in the chat box to order it from RJ Julia. And Joanna, thank you again. Claire, thank you for the conversation this evening. We all had a great time.
Thank you so much. And everyone, please buy books from RJ Julia.
Independent bookstores, yes.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank
Bye.
you.